everyone! I am Lily, and I'm not dead, and I'm back, and hopefully I'm back on my schedule. I'm pretty sure my allergy is in fact soda, or something else that I don't realize I've stopped eating since then. So as long as I avoid that, I should be good on this. I'm really happy I figured that out. So sorry about that again, but I'm back. And today I'm going to be doing a next part in a series which I haven't done in ages, which is kind of a shame, which is my DMing Basics series. And today we're going to be talking about player asides. And just for a general thing, a definition is, a player aside is when you, in the middle of a session, you have a player and you take them out of like the room, or if you're like doing it online, like you drop down like a Discord channel, because like in my online groups we have a specific channel for private conversations during D&D. Although I don't think it's called that anyway now. We changed all of our channel names are currently variations on talking about pod racing. Don't ask why. I don't know what it's currently called. But there is a private channel that we drop down to, and we will have a conversation. And it doesn't have to be one person, but it's essentially whenever you bring one or more people out of the session for a little bit to have a private conversation. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. The first thing that you should probably think of is like, why would you want to do this? Like, why would you want to pull someone aside? And the main reason is like, generally you could do it anytime you have a personal, like they're a character went off on their own or is having a private conversation, and they're also going to have that private conversation. Because the main benefit of it is to conceal information from the other players. And words that mean things, where say like there was like stuff with the backstory, or the player has a contact with like an informant the rest of the group doesn't know about, or they wouldn't necessarily like approve of, like, okay, the warlock has been like, okay, I'm gonna go seek out the help of some demons or something, but you may not want to divulge like the full information. They may not want to divulge all the information possible. So that's what you do it for. Generally, I guess. But on the other hand, there's a big danger of it, is that when you leave your focus as the DM moving out of that session, everyone else is kind of left hanging. They don't really have anything specific to do. Like, I've had groups in the past who will like keep role-playing and all that, and that's fine, but it does cause a lull in the action for what's going on, where they're not doing much, like there's not the story, and the attention is brought elsewhere. So you need to use it sparingly is the thing I'm getting at, and kind of the situation becomes, when do you use it? Because the first thing I want to say is that when you do these, you need to keep it brief. I may or may not be saying this because I was in a game with a new DM lately, and she had a player in an aside for nearly an hour. And that is just, it doesn't work, because everyone else in the session loses complete interest. Generally, at most, I would try to keep these things under 10 minutes. It is a good time if you want to pull it aside. Like, that gives like time for people, like, that's like enough time that like if people need to, they'll go get snacks, get a drink, and things like that while people wait, but they're not going to get necessarily bored. It's like a short break for everyone else while you're doing your own thing. But anything more than that, and people get bored, or very off topic, they lose train of thought. And typically when you're doing asides, you're already in kind of a roleplay heavy mindset, and keeping that energy going is very important in a session, where as soon as like they're joking about or talking about something else, they've pulled out of that roleplay mindset, and it's harder to get back into it. So that there's the danger there. That's why you want to keep it brief as possible. So typically it's going to be I typically use them is that since their main benefit is concealing information, I typically limit them to just being conversations. I don't usually do any like roles. I definitely don't do any combat or anything like that. If there are roles involved, I'll deal with that as is. I personally, if in like roleplay situations, like I don't have people necessarily roll for like bluff checks or diplomacy checks, I use those more for like abstracting conversation, but more into a more roleplay heavy setting, especially on one-on-ones, it's more about the content rather than what the dice say. So typically I want to focus on the information being passed, where it's like in that previous example, like the conversation will be essentially the conversation between like the demon and the warlock, and essentially like talking about a contract or whatever, exchange of information, and giving them that information and then sending them back. Not taking any more time than we necessarily need, but just there to get that information across, because that's the important thing in these situations. There was another thing where you must consider all then is, does this information need to be kept separate? Because obviously it's a situation where the other party member's not present, but you don't want to take people aside for every situation where a player is not present. Like, if you're doing like a mission where like the party is split, you don't like, unless there's a specific reason that you don't want each half of the party to know what they're doing. And honestly, at that point, it has to be a pretty good reason. If there shouldn't be information, it doesn't matter. I usually keep this for like personal information, key plot points that the rest of the party doesn't not knowing is key to that. And back to the first point, like personal like plot lines, because for my ongoing campaigns, I usually once every few sessions and outside of sessions, have like touch base with the players, like talking about their own personal stuff. Before the session, I have like a questionnaire of things that I want, information and such that I want from them to help flesh out their backstory and give me like story hooks and words and things. I check on in them, like talking about like, okay, what kind of a story, what growth is your character doing, and what is your kind of your personal plot lines. And those are things that I might want to keep a little bit secret if it's important. Like certain like major conversations asides that I've done in the past is usually when it's like a conversation between one person and a greater being, like if like a cleric has like made like a very like has decided like wants to commune with their deity or something like that, and they've been granted this audience, then oftentimes, if it's assuming it's private, if it's public that this audience is done, but if it's like an audience and their prayers, then I take them aside, which is another thing that asides allow you to do, especially in person, because there's something about moving to a different part of the house, a different room or something, and getting that personal one-on-one. I mean, you know, like from ASMR, you know the impact of like personal one-on-one personal attention, and it adds a lot more gravitas to the scene, where if you are speaking to one of like the gods or something, like you are speaking like one-on-one to Bahamut, and just having that there helps a lot to add to that tension and heighten that situation. Likewise, when you do the same scene as a group, you don't really have that one-to-one connection. It isn't that, like, presence as much that you have. So, like, what I'm making that is that the key to this is determining what information needs to be private, what causes that separation. And this comes back to the issue of players having a good understanding and, like, separation of in-character and out-of-character knowledge, where words that mean things, in the ideal party, they would be very good at that and mindful that, like, okay, like, oh, this other group knows that, like, the guards are coming that way, and they won't change their actions based on that knowledge that their character doesn't actually have. And for the most part, like, everyone does use that information at some level subconsciously, so it's impossible to fully negate, but it isn't as detrimental as necessarily pulling out players for that, where as great as it is for giving these high-impact scenes and raising this tension, because even for the other players, like, if done, like, short and to the point when they come back, there is that moment of, like, what was going on there, and it adds this air of mystery, and, like, the player who got the bold side is like, ooh, I have information that you don't. Oh. And that's really cool, and it's really great and awesome. But there is that cost of, it does pull everyone out of the session a little bit. It does have that stuff going on. And it's also one of those things where it's like, keep it short, but also keep them rare. Like, they lose some of their impact when it's like every session someone's getting pulled aside. And another thing is that while it may be hard depending on the character, like, obviously, like, a cleric or a warlock has, like, lots of built-in class reasons to have these grand one-on-one conversations and whatnot, but trying to find reasons for every player to have, like, one-on-ones, but also make sure they're comfortable with it, because there are a lot of players who aren't necessarily as comfortable with role-playing, and moving that to a one-on-one session worsens that, and you just gotta check in, like, back to my mantra in the series of, you gotta communicate with your players, make sure they're comfortable with it, and if you see discomfort, ask, and yeah. But it is important to, like, find, like, reasons, like, oh, like, oh, it's like, oh, the fighter of the party doesn't really have those connections, but you can find reasons that, like, maybe not in the same amount, but, like, it should be occasional. Like, don't leave people out, because these are really cool moments. Like, make the fighter privy to information that they may not want to share with anyone else. And stuff like that. So, where was I? One thing to note is that if you do need an extended sequence of someone, like if you just want to do kind of like a side adventure or a side quest of someone with a character, like something that's like very important to just them or might have secret information, just try to schedule that outside of a normal session. Either like when you're both free, just schedule it then, or alternatively, you can also just do it before or after a session, just squeeze it in there. I would still use those kind of sparingly, because when possible, like, this is a collaborative game, like, when possible, if there is important character information, try to do it as a group. Like, even if it isn't information, like, pertinent to their character, players can feel, like, left out when there's, like, action going on that they are not part of. So, I don't know, just keep it a minimum. Sometimes it just needs to happen, but it's very tempting to have, like, oh yes, a wizard's quest to get the familiar, to have him, like, do it on their own as a side thing. But that's really not necessary. You can easily incorporate the rest of the group if that is an important thing that needs to be roleplayed and wants to be roleplayed. Yeah, so nothing, rolling back to something I said before, which is talking about in-character and out-of-character information, how well your party deals with it, that I talk about the ideal case, like obviously they would separate that so you don't need to hide everything away in out of character moments. But one thing that you should consider though is that, how do I say, if your group is not good at this, either like they're just not doing it and they're just being little poops and using the information regardless, or they do have a lot of just unconscious doing it, and it may or may not be their fault. First, talk to them about it, see if just point it out directly, like, hey, can you keep information separate? If it remains to be an issue, the solution is not have more things that are separate outside, because then you're like kind of trading one problem for another problem, which is having too many out of character sessions, and we're not sessions, but like asides, and that's not good. But essentially just kind of restructure how you do things to have just mitigate situations where players know information that their characters shouldn't. So yeah, that's just a note on that one. Another thing I want to talk about is staging for these asides, where depending on where it is, and typically like if you're in an online game, there's not much you can do. You hop down to the next voice channel and you let it go, and it's gonna be fine. However, if you are in physical, in the real world, as they call it, you have a bit more control. And one thing I like to do is kind of like flavor it to set up the area to like what the conversation is. Where like if it's just a general like one-on-one conversation, then I'll just like go one or two rooms over, depending on how the loud group is. It's like if when you leave, if you're a very mirthful and boisterous group, maybe go a few rooms over so you don't their laughter ringing down the hallway isn't as loud, and your private conversation where you're talking to your dying the character's dying mother. But you just kind of like have that there. Typically for the most part, I like to just like a room that's like simple, like try to avoid too many distractions. If I know there's going to be an aside, I try to have like chairs already set up in there. Just there's a place to sit where it's comfortable and just like have that one-on-one. I like to have smaller rooms a lot of the time just because it adds that like intimacy and that like one-on-one aspect to it. Although I did have a campaign in college where for the most part we would play in the green room of the theater. We would actually go out into the black box theater for some of the one-on-ones, because a lot of the asides for that campaign was conversations of gods and whatnot, and like having that big like grand space, and having that like when I projected my voice, having that echo go everywhere, and just like adding to the presence of the one-on-one did help. It was really cool, and it added a lot to those scenes. So yeah, so that's just what I have to, like, find a fair, like, work with you can. Like, most of you don't have access to theaters when doing those sort of things. But also you can, like, kind of flavor it depending on it. Like, if it's, like, a rogue getting a contact from a member of the Thieves Guild that they go into, like, a fellow member being like that, like, just, like, tucking into an alleyway. Like, you can just do it, like, just down the hall, not falling into the room, just like standing, just close, like intimate, like, hey, this is the information. And when you're not seated at the table, you can kind of mirror those, like, you can do a bit more of a full role play and not just sitting there and doing your voice and overly done hand gestures. I gesture with my hands a lot when I'm DMing. Like, you think I do a lot of my body, like, when I'm recording and trying not to hit the mic? Oh, I am a very animated person when I'm playing D&D. But like you're just like leaning against the wall and doing that, not fully out of earshot of everyone else, but they can't hear what you're saying, and you can kind of make it work. One thing to note also is that like if you only need to get like one small piece of information across, you don't actually you don't have to pull them aside. Notes work great. Players love getting stuff, even if it's not like a fancily done prop. And I do like to do props in my real life games. I do try to have at least like one prop per session to hand out to the players. I find digital props just do not have the same impact. And digitally, you can just send like a message on Discord, like privately, which is almost easier than passing a note. But if like say like, oh, the contact of the Thieves Guild like knows that like, oh, their other contact is obviously a traitor, you can be like, hey, like, oh, they slipped like you were slipped this note by someone who knows the contact, like when you're at the tavern this evening, and you can just hand it to them. And then they can choose to divulge that information if they want. You don't need to pull into a full aside to just say, hey, Slimy Joe's a traitor. And you can figure it out from there. Like, you don't need to cause that disruption for a small piece of information like that. But yeah. One thing also neat to do that private information, and to an extent asides allow you to do, is I would use this sparingly, and it has to be the right groups and the right campaigns, but using it to have conflicting information where each like giving two players different information, and so it's like the situation of like, is one of them lying, is one thing, and like kind of like sowing this discord. It doesn't actually take a lot to sow discord and mistrust in the party, especially with like bards, rogues, and warlocks. Like, they come back from an aside and everyone's like, so who are you murdering or betraying? Why are you betraying us? So you don't really need to like push them into some fun, let's call it a intra-party strife, but you can feed them like conflicting information, and which can lead to some neat scenarios. One thing I would make sure though is that for conflicting information, I would almost usually do that with written information, so they can like double check it. Because I do find that if like player A has conflicting, like player A got information and player B has like says information that's contrarian to that, player A will oftentimes not think, oh, they must be lying, or we got twisted like wrong information. Instead they're like, oh, I must have not remembered that interaction properly. But when it's written down, there's a confirmation. It's like, huh, interesting. Is this how you would stroke a beard? I don't actually know. Yes. That just feels weird. I'm gonna stop that now. But yeah, so there are plenty of things you can do on that front. Kind of that, but yeah, so kind of like that's kind of generally my thoughts. Like, I know it's meandering a lot and kind of a ramble, and this is how these videos usually end up being. Yeah. Words that mean things. Do. Words that mean things. Oh yeah. So yeah. In conclusion, use them sparingly. Know like when information is important to be kept separate. And communicate with your players. Like, one thing that's really good for, especially for like personal information and things like that, is just ask your players. Like, it's like, hey, you're meeting with, you're having your first this conversation with your brother who you don't entirely trust and you thought was dead. Like, do you want to have this conversation in private or with other people, with like the rest of the party present? And that they can help guide that a little bit. Because some players are a lot more like open to being like, oh, I don't mind, like, I don't mind like not having as many secrets. But then there'll be other players who are like, yes, give me all of the secrets. Yeah, so just talk to your players. I mean, I just keep going back to it. Communicate with your players. Yeah, so, but yeah, no, that's about it on this topic. It's just, it got brought up because I did have that not less than ideal experience, and I realized that it was something after like that experience was like, I haven't talked about that, and it's not something that's like entirely intuitive as a player. They don't really talk about it that much, even in the DMGs that much. So, yeah. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if there's any like other topics you'd like to talk about for Dungeon Master Basics series, or D&D Basics in general. Just because I'd like to do this series more. I am considering doing kind of like a reboot of some of the early episodes, like the general intros to both the DMing Basics and the D&D Basics series, which is my player series. And just because I made those a long time ago, like before I had like proper equipment and stuff like that, and if I go back and watch them, they look and sound terrible. So yeah, that's all I have to say there, though. But yeah, no, let me know what you think. I don't know. I'm bad at like the whole YouTuber thing. It's like, oh yes, comment on my video with this prompt, because if you comment, it'll increase my appearance and like suggestions, and then I can grow and become a YouTube mogul. Yes, but I also don't really care, because I just want to make content that is good for you, and as long as there's people that enjoy my work, that's all that just matters. Yeah. I don't know. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a wonderful night. And as always, may our stories smile upon you.